Hi, my name is Eleni, and in this talk, I'll make a case for approximate spatial data management techniques that use distance-bounded spatial approximations. Oftentimes, domain experts use visualization tools to facilitate the exploration of large spatial data. Such tools require interactive responses, which is very challenging. At the same time, exact answers are not always required because visualizations are approximate in nature. Furthermore, users typically perform level of detail exploration. First, they look at a high-level overview, and only after they might zoom in for further details. Finally, the input data is inherently imprecise. GPS positions are typically accurate to within a roughly 5-meter radius, and the region boundaries are also fuzzy in the sense that adjacent regions are separated by extended zones, such as streets, and not by strictly defined one-dimensional lines. Overall, the interactivity expected from exploratory applications, coupled with the inherent properties of spatial data, necessitate a paradigm shift towards approximate spatial data processing. However, the traditional spatial query evaluation pipeline is not tailored towards approximate processing. Existing techniques typically use a two-step filter and refine pipeline. The first step evaluates the spatial predicate over approximated object geometries, which yields a set of candidate results. Then, the second step eliminates false matches by performing exact geometric tests over the original geometries. While the filtering step is typically fast, the refinement step is computationally intensive, which makes the overall processing slow. We therefore argue that in order to improve the overall performance and satisfy the requirements of exploratory applications that need interactivity but not necessarily exact answers, we need to skip the expensive refinement step and provide final answers solely based on the approximate geometries. To achieve that, we need to rethink the geometric approximations that we use. The currently used approximations sacrifice precision for compactness, and that leads to a large number of false matches. To have better filtering efficacy, we need to use more fine-grained approximations. With today's large DRAM sizes and NVM, we can now easily store more precise and thus larger approximations and access them fast. Furthermore, for a meaningful analysis, we also need to know how far off the approximate results are and even allow the user to control the precision of the approximation. Specifically, we argue that it is crucial to provide guarantees on the spatial distance between the original and the approximate geometry so that the user knows how closely the approximate results correspond to the particular spatial region she is interested in. The distance between the two geometries can be measured using the so-called Hausdorff distance. We say that a geometric approximation is epsilon distance bounded when its Hausdorff distance from the original geometry is at most epsilon. Interestingly enough, not all geometric approximations can be distance bounded. The most widely used approximation is the minimum bounding rectangle, or MBR, which is the smallest axis-aligned rectangle that encloses the complete original geometry. The MBR cannot be distance bounded because the distance depends on the original geometry and cannot be controlled. The approximation on the left-hand side is called uniform raster and represents the polygon using a set of equi-sized cells. Not only this approximation is more precise than the MBR, but it can also be distance bounded. Essentially, we can control the bound by adjusting the cell size. As the cell becomes smaller, the uniform raster approximates the original polygon more closely. Overall, the precision of raster approximations is independent of the geometry they approximate and tunable. Based on this important property, our vision is to develop approximate spatial data processing techniques that have raster approximations at their core. Next, I will give you an overview of how we can use distance-bounded raster approximations in various system components. To enable fast retrieval, a spatial system needs efficient indexes to store the approximations. We propose to index raster approximations in the one-dimensional domain. We map the two-dimensional raster cells to one-dimensional cell IDs using a space-filling curve, and we store the resulting 1D cell IDs in a sorted array. To locate the specified query cell in the sorted array, one could simply use binary search. To optimize the lookup time, we employ radix spline, which is a simple learned index that consists of two components, a set of spline points shown in blue that are extracted from the original CDF function, and a radix table that helps to quickly find the spline points. At query time, once we find the spline points that surround the lookup cell ID, we use linear interpolation to predict the position of the cell ID in the sorted array. Overall, we propose an index that maps raster cells to an array of cell IDs and then learns the position of the cell IDs in the array. To compare MBR with raster approximations, we performed an experiment using 39,200 polygons that correspond to NYC census regions and 1.2 billion points that correspond to taxi rides in New York. For each census region, we execute a query that counts the number of taxi rides within the region. We index the points with 4 state-of-the-art spatial indexes, the R* tree, the quad tree, the STR tree, and the KD tree that filter based on the MBR and compare those with our radix spline index and with binary search that filter based on the raster approximation. For the raster approximation, we have 3 precision levels, 32, 128, and 512 cells. The graph on the left-hand side shows the cumulative query time in seconds. As you can see, radix spline significantly outperforms the MBR-based indexes and the binary search. Only in the case of 512 cells, radix spline performs similarly as the KD tree. The graph on the right-hand side shows the number of qualifying points, that is, the number of points after the filter phase. As you can see, filtering using the raster approximation is more precise than when using the MBR. Notably, for 512 cells, the number of qualifying points is almost the same as in the exact case. So overall, by indexing raster approximations with a radix spline, we hit a sweet spot in the trade-off between precision and query time. As I said before, spatial queries are typically evaluated using a filter and refine pipeline. This results in monolithic operators that encapsulate both the filter and the refine phase. In addition, it leads to geometry-specific implementations because the refine phase depends on the geometric data type and the operation. For example, finding taxi rides within a region requires point-in-polygon tests, while finding parks within the same region requires polygon-in-polygon tests, assuming that parks are represented by polygons. This makes it hard to reuse operators and limits the set of options for optimization. The approximate rasterization-based processing that we propose overcomes this limitation because the raster approximation is a unified representation for different geometric data types. In the example on the slide, both the point shown on the left and the polygon shown on the right are represented by purple cells on a gray rasterized canvas. Given this unified representation, we propose a small set of simple parallelizable operators that are sufficient to realize common spatial queries without being tied to specific geometries. I won't go into details, but just to give you an intuition, let's look at a couple of examples. The blend operator takes 2 raster representations and merges them in one, as you can see at the top. Another example is the mask operator that clips a raster representation based on a mask condition. These operators are common in computer graphics, and thus they are amenable to GPU implementations. More importantly, the raster representation, along with a proposed set of operators, enable the creation of multiple alternative query plans, thereby adding flexibility in the optimization process. Let's now see how we can leverage our new operators in query evaluation. As a representative example, I will use the spatial aggregation query that you see on the slide. It takes 2 datasets as inputs, taxi rides and neighborhoods, and performs a spatial join that maps each pickup location of a taxi ride to the neighborhood that contains it. Then it calculates the count of taxi pickups for each neighborhood. A typical execution plan for this query uses an index nested loop join. We devise an alternative plan using our proposed operators. First, we blend the points in a single raster representation that maintains partial aggregates. That is, each cell keeps the aggregate of all points falling in it. Then we compose the blend and mask operators to identify the point cells that intersect with the polygon cells. Finally, we combine the aggregates from the individual cells that fall within a polygon to compute the aggregation for that polygon, using a combination of transformations and blending. These operations are natively supported by the graphics pipeline on the GPU, leading to orders of magnitude speedup over typical evaluation strategies, as we show in the paper. Summing up, in our work, we set the stage for spatial systems that employ distance-bounded raster approximations. We argue that approximate spatial data processing techniques need a distance bound and advocate for raster approximations that can be distance-bounded and can provide a sweet spot in the trade-off between precision and query time. Furthermore, I showed that we can express spatial operators on top of raster approximations as graphics primitives, which enables a wider set of optimization options and allows to exploit modern GPUs.